I'm the myth-busting monkey, and today I'm bringing you a full hour of lies. Things you repeated your whole life that your dad told you, that you saw on TV, and that are false from top to bottom. It's not your fault. We all got fed the same lines, in school, at the barbecue, over Sunday dinner, but today, we're going to knock them down one by one. No mercy. With data, with numbers, with full names and last names. Science, history, animals, food, cars, your own body, and even the words you use without knowing where they came from. Grab something to drink, get comfortable, and subscribe now because this kicks off strong and doesn't stop. Alright, here comes the first one. You've got a magnet with its north pole on one side and its south pole on the other, and you figure that if you cut it in half, you'll end up with one piece that's all north and another that's all south. False, and this one will blow your mind. You cut the magnet in half, and you end up with two complete magnets, each with a brand new north and south of its own. Cut it again, and the same thing happens. And again, all the way down to a single atom, and every single time, both poles show up. Science has spent more than a century searching for a magnet with just one pole, something called a magnetic monopole, and has never found one in nature. A magnet is like a magic earthworm. You cut it, and instead of killing it, you multiply it. You're never going to get a north all by itself. You were taught that fingerprints are the most human, most unique thing that exists, yours and nobody else's. Half true. Unique, yes. Human, not so much. The koala has fingerprints so similar to ours that even under a microscope, they're hard to tell apart. Same ridges, same whorls, same pattern of lines. It's believed the koala developed them for the same reason you did, to grip and handle branches and leaves with precision. It's so close that in theory a koala could contaminate a crime scene and throw off a forensic expert. Two branches of the evolutionary tree, separated by more than 100 million years, ended up with the same design on their fingertips. You think your fingerprint sets you apart from animals. A koala shares it with you. The snail in your garden, the one crawling along at less than an inch an hour, seems like the most harmless animal on the planet. Well, it has more teeth than a shark, than a lion, and then you multiplied by 1,000. That whole idea that snails don't bite is pretty much a lie. They have a tongue called a radula, a kind of sandpaper with row after row of microscopic teeth. And in some species, there are more than 14,000 of them. With that, they scrape leaves and algae down to dust. And limpets, those creatures stuck to rocks, have teeth made of the strongest biological material known, stronger than spider silk. The slowest thing in the garden is hiding the biggest arsenal. Never underestimate something that moves slow. You look at the International Space Station and picture it way out there, lost in deep space, millions of miles away. False. And not even close. The station orbits at about 250 miles up. If you could drive straight up in a perfectly straight line, you'd get there faster than driving from Buenos Aires to Cordoba. It's so close you can see it with the naked eye at night. A bright little dot crossing the sky in just a few minutes. No telescope needed. What keeps it up there isn't distance, it's speed. It travels at more than 17,000 miles per hour, so fast that it keeps falling in circles around the Earth without ever touching it. Space isn't as far away as you think. It's a short drive away, just straight up. You watch the movie about the little orange and white fish, and it never crossed your mind that this creature can actually change from male to female in real life. Bizarre but true. Every clownfish is born male. They live in small groups inside an anemone, and there's a hierarchy. At the top of it all is the single female, the biggest one. When that female disappears, the most dominant male in the group transforms into a female to take her place. It's a real biological process called protandrous hermaphroditism, and there's no going back. So in the movie, if it had been biologically accurate, when the mom disappears, the dad would have become the new mom. Nature wrote an ending no film studio would dare touch. That fish doesn't choose between being a father or a mother. It's both, one after the other. You've had it burned into your brain. Everest is the tallest mountain there is, the roof of the world, almost 30,000 feet high. Not quite right. It's the tallest on Earth, but in the solar system, it's a sad little runt. On Mars, there's a volcano called Olympus Mons that stands about 14 miles high, more than 2.5 times taller than Everest. It's so wide that if you set it down in Argentina, it would cover an entire province. And if you were standing at its base, the summit would be so far away that the curve of Mars would hide it from view. You wouldn't see the whole thing even if you tried. The roof of the world is just the neighborhood attic. Next to the Martian giant, our Everest is a speed bump. You think ketchup is the most American invention in the world. Pure tomato and sugar. Made in the USA. Not quite. The word ketchup isn't even English. It comes from a language spoken in southern China, from Hokkien, where ketchup was a fermented sauce made with fish and brine, without a single drop of tomato in it. That dark, salty sauce traveled through Southeast Asia. English traders came across it there in the 17th century and brought it home. For a long time, English ketchup was made with mushrooms, with walnuts, with anchovies, anything but tomato. It wasn't until the 19th century in the United States that someone added tomato and sugar, and it became what you squeeze onto your fries. Today, the king of American fast food was born as Chinese fish sauce. From rotten fish to French fries. Quite the journey. You see Neptune in a photo, that gorgeous deep blue, and you assume it's a planet covered in oceans like Earth. The opposite is true. Neptune is a giant made of gas and ice. There are no seas there for you to dive into. That beautiful blue doesn't come from water. It comes from a gas, methane, the same gas that's in your kitchen tank. The methane in its atmosphere swallows up the red light from the sun and bounces the blue back toward us, which is why we see it in such an intense color. So the bluest planet in the solar system is painted with tank gas, not seawater. Hang on, don't go anywhere, because in myth number 34, you're going to find out that another planet you picture as walkable doesn't even have a floor. Neptune isn't ocean blue, it's methane blue. You've laughed your whole life at the penguin because it's a bird that can't fly. And yeah, it doesn't get off the ground. But that's only half true, because penguins do fly. It's just that they fly underwater. Their wings turned into rigid flippers, and they move them exactly like a bird moves through the sky. Flapping, gliding, banking into turns. The emperor penguin dives more than 1,600 feet deep and can hold its breath for over 20 minutes. Something no Olympic swimmer could ever dream of. It's so streamlined that it barely burns any energy. It didn't lose the ability to fly, it just changed the setting. It traded air for water, and in the water, it's a torpedo. It's not a bird that can't fly, it's a bird that chose a different sky. It seems impossible that a diamond, the hardest and most expensive stone there is, could have anything to do with the soft black lead in a pencil. And yet, they're the exact same thing. Both the diamond and the graphite in your pencil are made of exactly the same material, pure carbon 100%. The only difference is how the atoms are arranged inside. In a diamond, the carbon atoms are locked together in an extremely tight three-dimensional structure, super rigid, which is why it's the hardest material there is. In graphite, those same atoms line up in flat layers that slide over each other, which is why it glides across paper and writes. Same brick, different way of stacking it. The most expensive and the cheapest things in the carbon world are twins. Change the order, and you change everything. Today, there's no chicken parmesan or pasta sauce without tomato, but for almost 2 centuries in Europe, people looked at the tomato like it was pure poison. And that's not a joke. When the tomato arrived from the Americas, Europeans noticed the plant was related to other poisonous plants from back home, so they were suspicious. On top of that, wealthy people ate off pewter plates and cutlery, which contained lead. The tomato, being acidic, pulled the lead out of the plate. People got sick, and the poor tomato took the blame. For decades, it was grown purely as decoration, to look at, not to eat. It wasn't until the 18th century that people started working up the courage to try it. The most common ingredient in your kitchen was once considered a poisonous fruit. What saved it was people switching plates. You picture a shark with a skeleton of sharp bones. A monster built like any other big animal? Not true. A shark doesn't have a single bone anywhere in its body. Its entire skeleton is made of cartilage, the same flexible material you have at the tip of your nose and in your ears. That's why it's so agile and light in the water. Cartilage weighs less than bone and gives it the flexibility to turn on a dime. Sharks belong to a group of cartilaginous fish that has existed for more than 400 million years. Long before the dinosaurs. The only truly hard part on a shark is its teeth, which really are mineralized, and which fall out and get replaced by the thousands over its lifetime. The ocean's most feared predator is soft on the inside. All cartilage, zero bones. You catch that amazing smell right before it rains, or when the first drop hits dry ground, and you assume it's the smell of water. Not true. Water has no smell at all. That scent has a name. It's called petrichor, and it isn't produced by rain. It's produced by soil bacteria called Streptomyces that release a compound called geosmin. Your nose is so sensitive to geosmin that it can detect tiny amounts, just a few parts per billion. When a raindrop hits dry earth, it bursts those stored molecules and releases them into the air. And that's what you're smelling. The word petrichor was coined by two Australian scientists in 1964, combining the words for stone and the fluid of the gods from mythology. That beautiful smell of rain is really the smell of happy bacteria. The earth is breathing, and you're smelling it. You picture a Dalmatian, and you see the black spots first thing. A white dog covered in polka dots. Surprise! They're born without a single one. Dalmatian puppies come into the world completely white, smooth, without a single spot. The spots start showing up around 2 or 3 weeks of life. Little by little, almost like they're developing over time, the way an old photo does. They keep appearing until the dog is about a month and a half old, and after that the pattern is set for life, unique to each dog. Like a fingerprint, so the image you sometimes see in movies of a spotted baby Dalmatian is wrong. At first they're little snowballs. The Dalmatian's trademark doesn't come standard from the factory. It shows up later, spot by spot, like someone drawing the design with invisible ink. You hear the word algorithm all day long. The app's algorithm. The algorithm recommending videos. And it sounds like a modern technical term. Actually, it's ancient, and it's a man's name. It comes from Al-Khwarizmi, a Persian mathematician who lived around the 9th century, more than 1,000 years ago, in the city of Baghdad. He was one of the people who popularized the number system you use today, and he wrote a book whose title gave rise to another word you use, algebra. When his works were translated into Latin, his name got twisted into algorithm, which ended up meaning a set of steps for solving something. So every time you complain about the algorithm, you're naming a 1,000-year-old Persian scholar. What runs the internet carries the twisted last name of one man. It's not a machine, it's a guy. You hear electric eel and you picture a regular eel but with sparks coming off it. Wrong on 2 counts. That creature from the Amazon that delivers shocks of hundreds of volts, enough to knock down a horse, isn't an eel at all. It's a knife fish, much more closely related to catfish and carp than to true eels. It has a similar elongated shape, which is where the confusion comes from, but on the inside, it's something else entirely. It generates electricity using thousands of cells stacked up like batteries in a flashlight, and it can discharge more than 600 volts at once to stun its prey or defend itself. It even breathes air at the surface, which is unusual for a fish. It got named after the eel because of its looks, not because of family ties. The most electric creature in the river is an imposter shaped like a snake. It's not even an eel. You've been told your whole life that teeth are the bones of your mouth. False. A tooth isn't bone. Not even close. Bone is alive. It has cells inside it. It breaks and heals itself, which is why a fracture mends in a matter of weeks. A tooth doesn't work that way. On the outside, it's covered by enamel, the hardest material your body produces. Harder even than steel in terms of surface hardness, but without a single living cell inside to repair it. That's why a cavity never heals on its own. Bone regenerates. A tooth just gives up. Inside, there's no marrow or blood flowing like there is in a femur. There's dentin and a tiny pulp with nerves. It's more closely related to an armored fingernail than to a rib. If a tooth were bone, dentists wouldn't exist. They exist because it isn't. Oh, you pick up a fork without thinking twice, like it's always existed since the caveman days. False. The dinner fork is a relatively recent invention in Europe, and when it showed up, it caused a moral scandal. In the Middle Ages, people ate with their hands and a knife, period. When a Byzantine princess arrived in Italy in the 11th century using a little fork to bring food to her mouth, priests and ordinary people harshly criticized her. They said it was a gesture of arrogance, that she was rejecting what God gave you to eat with, meaning your hands. It took the fork centuries to be accepted. It only became common in Europe around the 16th to 18th century, depending on the country. The most innocent utensil on your table was once considered almost sinful. Eating with two hands was proper. Eating with a fork was reckless. You draw a heart and figure that's where blood gets made, like a little red factory pumping and producing. Big mistake. The heart is a pump, nothing more. It moves blood around but doesn't manufacture a single drop. Blood is made inside your bones, in the bone marrow. That soft tissue in the center of the bone. Right there, at this very second, about 2 million red blood cells are being produced every second. Read that again. 2 million per second, all day, every day of your life. Your hips, your sternum, and your ribs are the most productive factories in your body. The heart distributes it, but the heavy lifting happens quietly inside your bones. Blood isn't born where it beats. It's born where nobody's looking. You look at snow and think, obviously, snow is white. False, and the reason why is beautiful. Snow has no color at all. Each snowflake is made of tiny ice crystals, and ice is transparent, colorless like glass. So why does it look white? Because a snowflake isn't a single crystal. It's a whole bunch of crystals stuck together with tons of faces and surfaces. When sunlight, which carries every color mixed together, hits all those faces, it bounces off in every direction evenly without holding on to any particular color. And that mix of every color bouncing around together is exactly what your eye reads as white. It's the same reason crushed glass or sugar looks white, even though it's transparent. Snow is transparent ice. White is just light playing pinball. You think of chess and you picture a Russian parlor with serious men in scarves. Not quite right. Chess wasn't born in Europe or in Russia. It was born in India around the 6th century, and it was called chaturanga, which roughly translates to the 4 divisions of the army: infantry, cavalry, elephants, and chariots. From those came the pawn, the knight, the bishop, and the rook. From there, it traveled to Persia, where the Persians would shout Shah when they threatened the king. And from that, Shah, came our word check. It wasn't until many centuries later that it reached Europe, where the rules were changed to make it faster. The coldest looking board game in the world, all icy strategy, was born under the heat of India. Every time you say check, you're speaking ancient Persian without even knowing it. You send a message to someone on the other side of the world and picture the signal shooting up into space, bouncing off satellites, and coming back down over there. Mostly wrong. About 99% of internet traffic between continents travels through thick cables laid along the bottom of the ocean. There are more than 800,000 miles of undersea cables crossing the seas. Some as thin as a garden hose, carrying information in pulses of light at insane speeds. When you send a message to Japan, that text dives underwater, crosses the Pacific along the muddy seafloor, dodging volcanoes and sharks, and comes out on the other side. The cloud isn't up in the sky. The cloud is soaking wet, down on the ocean floor. You think a red flower acts like a magnet for bees, calling them from far away with that bold color. The opposite is true. Bees are practically blind to red. They see it as dark, dull, almost black. Their eyes pick up other colors: blue, green, and something you can't see at all: ultraviolet light. Many flowers have ultraviolet patterns, like invisible landing strips to us, but bright and obvious to a bee, showing it exactly where the nectar is. That's why flowers that depend on bees tend to be blue, purple, or yellow, and truly red flowers, like many wildflowers, tend to target other pollinators like birds instead. A bee doesn't see the world the way you do. It sees a neon sign where you see a plain petal. Juliet on the balcony says that famous line, "Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" And everyone assumes she's asking, "Where are you, Romeo?" scanning the yard looking for him, mistranslated from top to bottom. In Shakespeare's English, wherefore doesn't mean where, it means why. Juliet isn't looking for him, she's suffering. What she's actually saying is, why do you have to be Romeo? Why do you have to be a Montague of all things, the surname of her family's enemies? She's cursing the name, not the location. That's exactly why she immediately follows up asking him to give up his name. 400 years of joking about Juliet leaning out looking for a hidden Romeo, when really she was philosophizing about fate. She wasn't asking where you are, she was asking why you are who you are. We call it a coconut, and in English the word nut is right there inside coconut. So obviously it's a nut. Nope, botanically speaking, a coconut isn't a nut at all. It's what experts call a drupe, which is a fruit with 3 layers. An outer skin, a fibrous middle layer, and inside a hard pit that protects the seed. Take a look at its structural relatives, the peach, the plum, the olive, and the mango. All drupes with their own pit. The coconut is a giant drupe, adapted to float across the ocean and travel from one island to another without sinking, which is why its shell is so fibrous and light. We call it a nut out of habit, but it only has the name in common. A coconut is a giant hairy peach that learned how to sail. You hear that there are telescopes powerful enough to see the flag the astronauts left on the moon. Absolutely false. There is no telescope on Earth. There never was. And there still isn't one today capable of that. The flag is about 5 feet across, and to make out something that small from nearly 250,000 miles away, you'd need a telescope with a mirror dozens of miles wide, something physically impossible to build. Not even Hubble, which can see galaxies millions of light years away, can resolve the flag, because seeing something huge and distant glowing is one thing, and picking out a tiny object is another. The only photos of the flag were taken by probes orbiting close to the moon. From your backyard, forget it. You can see an entire galaxy, but not that little scrap of cloth. Everyone sold it to you as the trendy healthy grain, right alongside oats and wheat. Not quite true. Quinoa isn't a grain. It's a seed, and it isn't even closely related to wheat or corn. It's actually part of the same family as spinach and beets. Yes, those leafy greens. That's why people in the know call it a pseudo-cereal, because we use it like it's a grain even though it isn't one. The plant comes from the Andes. It's been cultivated for more than 5,000 years, and it can handle cold, drought, and altitude where wheat won't even sprout. It contains all 9 essential amino acids, which is rare in the plant world. The queen of healthy grains isn't a grain at all. It's a spinach dressed up as a grain. You're watching a video of a car accelerating, and suddenly the wheels seem to spin backward, even though the car is moving forward, and you swear it's a glitch in the video. False? It's pure physics, and it's called the stroboscopic effect. A camera doesn't film continuously. It takes a bunch of photos per second, 24 or 30 frames. If the wheel spins just a little less than 1 full turn between each shot, your brain connects the images and it looks like it's spun backward. It's the same trick that makes a fan's blades sometimes appear to slow down or reverse under certain lighting. It's not magic, and it's not an editing mistake. It's your eye piecing together a movie out of separate photos. The wheel is doing just fine. Your brain is the one getting dizzy. You grab the shampoo in the shower and figure that word is thoroughly English. Shampoo. Pure Anglo-Saxon through and through. Half right. Spanish did borrow the word shampoo from English shampoo, but shampoo itself wasn't born in England, it was born in India. It comes from the Hindi word shampoo, which meant to press, to knead, to massage the head and scalp. The British encountered that in colonial India back in the 18th century, brought the word home, and over time it came to mean soap for your hair. So every time you wash your head, you're using a centuries-old Hindi verb that originally meant to massage. The word traveled from India to England and only later made it into your shower. The British didn't invent shampoo, they were just the mail carrier who brought it over from India. You watch a bee dive into a flower covered in yellow dust and figure that's what it uses to make honey. Mostly wrong. Pollen is a different thing entirely. It's the protein, the food for the larvae in the hive. Honey is made from nectar, a sweet, clear liquid that the flower produces specifically to attract bees. The bee sucks up that nectar, stores it in a special stomach where it adds enzymes, goes back to the hive, passes it mouth to other bees, and then they all fan it with their wings to evaporate the water until it thickens into honey. To make about a pound of honey, the bees in a single hive visit around 2 million flowers. Honey isn't processed pollen, it's nectar dehydrated by sheer wing power. In cartoons, a comet goes zooming by, a streak of light crossing the sky in a second, and it's gone. False. What you saw zooming by was a shooting star, which is just a speck of dust burning up in the atmosphere. A real comet moves so slowly to the eye that it looks practically frozen in the sky. It's so far away, millions of miles out, that even though it's moving incredibly fast through space, from here, you see it almost motionless for days or even weeks at a time. The famous Halley's Comet shows up roughly every 76 years, and when it does, it hangs around up there for weeks. You confused a 1-second streak with a visitor who sticks around for a month. A comet doesn't pass by. A comet stays over. You picture a cow as a milk machine, born, grown, and pumping out milk all day like an open faucet. False. A cow, just like any mammal, including a woman, only produces milk after having offspring. Milk exists to feed a newborn calf, not for your coffee. For a cow to give milk, she has to get pregnant, give birth, and enter lactation, and only then does the milk really start flowing. If she isn't bred again, production tapers off on its own after a few months. A well-cared-for dairy cow can produce more than 8 gallons a day at her peak, which is a huge amount, but it always starts with a calf involved. The faucet isn't always open, it only turns on when there's a calf waiting to eat. You use words like boycott, silhouette, and saxophone without ever thinking that behind each one is a real flesh and blood person with that last name. Bizarre but true. Boycott comes from a man named Charles Boycott, a land agent in Ireland who, in 1880, people decided to completely shut out to pressure him. Nobody would sell to him, nobody would work for him. They froze him out so famously that his last name became the verb. Silhouette comes from Etienne de Silhouette, a French finance minister so stingy that his name became linked to anything cheap, to a drawing made with nothing but a shadow. And the saxophone was invented by a Belgian named Adolphe Sax, who put his own last name on it. 3 everyday words that are actually 3 people. Every time you boycott something, you're naming an Irishman who ended up very alone. You picture Jupiter as a giant solid ball, an enormous field where in theory you could go for a walk. Big mistake. Jupiter is a gas giant. It has no solid surface for you to stand on. If an astronaut went down there in some magic suit, they'd sink through layer after layer of increasingly thick gas. First clouds, then an atmosphere that keeps compressing and heating up, and they'd never find a clear floor to land on. Further down, the pressure would be so brutal, it would crush them long before they reached anything like a center. There's no beach, no mountain, no ground. It's all gas turning into liquid, and then into something strange under the pressure. It's so huge that more than 1,300 Earths could fit inside it. The biggest planet in the solar system is a giant balloon with no shell. You can't stand on it. It would swallow you whole. Since fish don't have eyelids and their eyes are always open, you swear they never sleep, that they're awake 24 hours a day. False. Fish do sleep, or at least they enter a resting state very similar to sleep. They slow down, stay still in a corner, lower their activity, and even react more slowly to what's happening around them. Some lie on their side on the bottom, others tuck themselves among plants, and parrotfish actually build a bubble of mucus around their bodies to sleep protected inside, a kind of slime sleeping bag. They don't close their eyes simply because they have no lid to close them with. The fish in your tank sleeps just like you do. What it can't do is turn off the light in its eyes. Your battery dies. And your brother-in-law tells you, "No worries, we'll push it and it'll start." And sometimes that's true, but only half true, because that trick only works if the car has a manual transmission. With an automatic, you could push it downhill all afternoon and it's never going to turn on. Push-start trick works because in a manual transmission, the wheels spinning turn the engine over directly and wake it up. In an automatic, there's a mechanism full of fluid in between, the torque converter, that cuts that direct connection whenever the engine is off. The wheels spin, but the message never reaches the engine. You could have 20 brothers-in-law pushing. If it's automatic, it's not starting. The push trick only works if the car has a gear shift. Close your eyes and picture a pineapple. You definitely imagined it hanging from a palm tree, like coconuts. False. The pineapple doesn't grow on any tree at all. It grows low to the ground on a plant with long, tough, spiky leaves, kind of like a giant aloe. The plant sends up a single stalk from the center, and at the tip, a single pineapple grows, just one per plant, per season. On top of that, it takes about 2 years to produce that fruit. So every pineapple you eat represents 2 years of patience from that plant. It's actually related to a group of plants that grow up in other trees. The bromeliads, the decorative kind. The tropical fruit you draw up high on a palm tree is actually something you pick by bending down. It doesn't fall from above. It grows right at knee height. You look up at the night sky and see white dots, all the same like salt scattered on a black tablecloth. Incomplete! Stars do have colors, and the color tells you how hot they are. The opposite of what you'd think. Red stars are the coolest ones, running around 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. White and blue stars are the hottest. They can pass 18,000, even 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's like the flame on your stove. The red flame is milder, and the blue one will really burn you. Our sun is a yellowish white, sitting somewhere in the middle of the scale. What happens is that at night, your eyes barely pick up color in things that dim, so you end up seeing them as white. The sky isn't black and white. It's a rainbow your eyes can't quite make out. You think muscles push and pull, that they can generate force in either direction whenever you need it. Not really. A muscle only knows how to do one thing. Contract, meaning shorten and pull. Push in the literal sense it cannot do. So how do you straighten your arm if your bicep only knows how to bend it? Easy. They work in opposing pairs. When the bicep contracts and pulls to bend the elbow, the tricep on the other side relaxes, and to straighten the arm, the tricep pulls while the bicep loosens up. They're like two guys fighting over a rope, each one pulling their own way, and between the two of them, they move the bone. That's why your body has antagonistic muscle pairs everywhere. Neither one ever pushes. They all pull. Your entire body moves through pure, coordinated tugging. You were taught the golden rule. Mammals give birth to live young, and the ones that lay eggs are birds and reptiles. Incomplete, because there are mammals that lay eggs, and they're about as strange as it gets. They're called monotremes, and the most famous ones are the platypus and the echidna, both from Australia and the surrounding area. The platypus has a duck bill, a beaver tail, venom in its hind legs, and on top of all that it lays eggs. But then it nurses its young with milk, because it does produce milk. When the first European scientists saw a stuffed platypus, they thought it was a hoax, that someone had sewn several animals together. The rule that mammals don't lay eggs has living, breathing exceptions. Nature signed the contract, and buried in the fine print was a duck that breastfeeds. You eat a kiwi and think of New Zealand, obviously, since it's even named after the bird from there. Mostly wrong. The kiwi fruit originally comes from China, where it's been grown for centuries under the name Chinese gooseberry. In the early 20th century, some seeds were taken to New Zealand, where it thrived incredibly well, and growers started cultivating it for export. The problem was the name. Chinese gooseberry didn't sell, and on top of that, tariffs at the time hit gooseberries hard, and the word Chinese was a marketing problem right in the middle of the Cold War. So around 1959, someone had the idea to rename it kiwi after New Zealand's national bird. Brown and fuzzy, just like the fruit. Pure marketing. The fruit most associated with New Zealand is a Chinese immigrant with a stage name. It wasn't born there, it just changed its last name to sell better. You put on your pajamas to sleep, figuring it's a modern English word straight out of American movies. False. Pajama comes from Persian, from pajama, which translates almost literally to leg garment. They were loose, light, incredibly comfortable pants worn in Persia and in India for lounging around the house and for sleeping in the heat. British colonists in the region during the 19th century adopted them because they were fantastic, brought them back to the West, and the word traveled along with the garment. So that comfortable thing you put on at night has a name that's more than 1,000 years old. From a language spoken thousands of miles away, you sleep dressed in Persian history and never even knew it. Pajamas aren't pop culture. They're pure Middle East. You look at a fish in a tank and see those eyes always open, fixed, and figure it blinks just like you do, only really fast. False. Most fish don't have eyelids. They can't close their eyes, even if they wanted to. And the reason makes sense once you think about it. They don't need them. Eyelids exist to keep the eye moist and clean, and a fish already lives inside water. Its eye is bathed 24 hours a day. There's no risk of it drying out. The water cleans and moistens its eye constantly, for free. That's why it sleeps with its eyes open. Not because of insomnia, but because it has nothing to cover them with. Sharks are a rare exception. Some have a membrane that covers the eye to protect it while biting. An ordinary fish watches without ever resting. It's not that it doesn't sleep. It's that it has no lid. You say chocolate, tomato, and avocado like they're words that have always been Spanish. False. Those three and many more come from Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs in Mexico. Chocolate comes from Xocolatl. Tomato comes from tomatl. Avocado comes from ahuacatl. Notice the pattern. A lot of them end in that TL sound that Spanish didn't have, so it got swapped for toy. Coyote too from coyotl. Even the word for chewing gum comes from Nahuatl. When the Spanish ran into things that didn't exist in Europe, like cacao or tomatoes, they kept the local name because there wasn't another one. So every time you order a chocolate, you're pronouncing in twisted form a little piece of Aztec language from more than 500 years ago. Half your pantry speaks Nahuatl, and you never even noticed. You've probably heard the sweet story. A shepherd noticed his goats jumping around all hyped up after eating some red berries, tried them himself, and that's how coffee was discovered. Lovely story, almost certainly made up. That shepherd would have been named Kaldi, supposedly from Ethiopia. But the story first shows up in writing only in the 17th century, hundreds of years after people were already drinking coffee. In other words, someone wrote it down way later, with zero evidence, the way you'd tell a campfire legend. What we do know for certain is that coffee originally comes from Ethiopia, and from there, it moved to Yemen, where people started roasting it and drinking it seriously. The goats make for a nice story, but there's not much real history behind it. Good coffee, bad source. Nobody actually signed off on that discovery. You watch a snake flicking its forked tongue in and out and figure it's threatening you, hissing, or trying to scare you off. Not quite. A snake sticks out its tongue to smell. It's literally its way of sniffing out the world. The tongue flicks out, picks up chemical particles floating in the air and on the ground, and carries them back inside the mouth to a special organ on the roof of the mouth, the Jacobson's organ, which analyzes them like a super powerful internal nose. That's why the tongue is split into 2 points, to pick up scents from 2 locations at once and figure out which direction the prey is in, like 2 stretched out nostrils. It's not challenging you or gearing up to attack. It's smelling you. Every flick is a puff of information. A snake smells with its tongue, not with its nose. You watch an elephant dip its trunk into water and figure it drinks like it's using a giant straw, sucking the water straight down to its stomach. Not quite. An elephant doesn't swallow water through its trunk, it would choke, because the trunk is an extension of its nose and leads to its lungs. What it actually does is suck water up into the trunk, hold it there like a bucket, then bring the tip to its mouth and only then release it and swallow. The trunk is a cup, not a straw. And what a cup it is, it can hold up to 2 or 3 gallons at once. With those same muscles, and there are more than 40,000 of them, It can pick up a single peanut off the ground or tear down a whole tree. It doesn't drink through its nose. It scoops with its nose and drinks with its mouth. Just like you. Hang in there a little longer, because in myth number 61, you're going to find out which body part a butterfly uses to taste its food, and it's going to creep you out a little. You hear that saffron is the most expensive spice in the world and figure it must be some rare root from an impossible mountain. The real reason is simpler and crazier. Saffron is the stigma, tiny thin red threads from a purple flower, Crocus sativus. Each flower has only 3 of those threads, and they have to be pulled out by hand, one at a time, with the patience of a saint. To gather about 2¼ pounds of saffron, you need roughly 150,000 flowers and countless hours of bent-over labor. That's why it costs what it costs. Sometimes more than gold by weight. It's not magic, it's labor. You're paying for the hand harvest of an entire field of flowers just to season a paella. The most expensive thing in your kitchen is 3 little hairs plucked from a flower, one by one. You draw planets as perfect little circles, round as a compass could make them. Half true, Earth is already a bit wider at the equator than from pole to pole, but with Saturn and Jupiter this gets outrageous. Both spin on their axis so fast that they genuinely flatten out, you can see it. Jupiter, an absolute monster of a planet, completes a full rotation on its axis in under 10 hours. All that brutal spinning pushes the planet's belly outward from the force of the rotation. Kind of like when you spin pizza dough and it stretches wider. Saturn is the most distorted of all. It's almost 10% wider at the equator than from pole to pole. You can actually see the oval shape if you look closely. They're not soccer balls. They're more like squashed tangerines. Spinning that fast comes at a price, and the price is a bulging belly. You say fulano de tal to refer to some random unnamed person, and figure it's a homegrown expression. Hours from here. False. Fulano comes from Arabic, from fulan, which meant exactly that, some random person, someone unspecified. The Arabs left it behind during the nearly 800 years they spent on the Iberian Peninsula. Fulano comes from fulan and mengano from mankan, both pure Arabic. But watch out for the third one, because zutano sneaks in as a fraud. That one isn't Arabic. It comes from Latin satano, from Satanus, which meant known, already familiar. So in the most homegrown sounding trio you use, 2 are Arabic and 1 is Latin in disguise. Every time you name Fulano and Mengano, you're reciting medieval Arabic without knowing it. But when you say Zutano, you've switched over to Latin. You thought you were speaking your own language. You were actually speaking 2 ancient languages at once. You've got the idea that a carnivorous plant feeds by hunting flies? That it eats insects the way you eat a burger? Not quite. A carnivorous plant, like any plant, mainly feeds off sunlight. It does photosynthesis just like a fern or a cactus. The bugs it catches aren't its main food source. They're a supplement. These plants tend to grow in poor, swampy soil that's missing one key nutrient, nitrogen. Since they can't get it from the ground, they steal it from the insects they catch and digest. In other words, the bug isn't the main course. It's the vitamin missing from the soil it lives in. Give it good soil and it can survive without catching anything at all. It's not a hungry killer. It's a vegetarian that occasionally eats a bug to round out its diet. In your spice rack, you've got black pepper, white pepper, green pepper, and you figure they're 3 different plants from 3 different places. False? All 3 come from the exact same plant, Piper nigrum. The difference is when you harvest it and how you process it. Green pepper is the unripe berry picked early and preserved. Black pepper is that same berry left to ripen a bit longer and then sun-dried until it wrinkles up and turns dark. And white pepper is the fully ripe berry with the outer skin removed, leaving just the pale core inside. Same shrub, same fruit, different stage of life. It's like grapes and raisins. 3 peppers you swore were enemies are actually the same family at 3 different ages. Watch out though, pink peppercorns really do come from a different plant. That one's the only imposter. You say snakes and lizards are cold-blooded animals, and you picture their blood as literally icy, straight out of the fridge. Backwards, misunderstood. Cold-blooded is a misleading nickname. They're actually called ectotherms, which means they don't generate their own body heat internally the way you do. Instead, they regulate their temperature using the environment. That's why you see them sunbathing on a rock. They're essentially charging up like a phone battery. And here's the detail. A lizard sunbathing in the middle of summer can have blood hotter than yours. Easily above 95 degrees Fahrenheit, its blood isn't cold. It's borrowed from the sun. At night or in the shade, they cool down, sure, but out in the sun, they're burning up. They're not cold on the inside. They just take on the temperature from outside. You say hurricane and figure it's a good old Spanish word, straight from centuries of the language. Backwards. Hurricane is one of the words Spanish borrowed from the native peoples of the Americas, specifically from the Taino people of the Caribbean. They used a word like huracan to refer to a force of nature, a kind of spirit or deity of wind and violent storms. When the Spanish arrived and saw those tremendous storms that didn't exist back home in Europe, they kept the local word because they had no word of their own for something like that. From there it passed into English as hurricane and spread across much of the world. A word you'd assume is Latin is actually American, older than any ship that ever arrived. The fiercest wind in the Caribbean is named in the Taino language, a native name, not an imported one. Someone at the bar orders a dark beer, thick and rich looking, and drops the line. This one hits harder because it's more concentrated. False. The dark color of a beer has nothing to do with how much alcohol it has. The dark color comes from more heavily roasted malt, grains that spent more time exposed to heat and darkened, just like more toasted bread is darker but not more alcoholic. Guinness, the most famous dark beer on the planet, has about 4.2% alcohol, which is less than plenty of common light beers that run above 5%. In fact, a lot of dark beers are smooth and even light in calories. The dark color tricks your eye. It seems heavier than it actually is. Color tells you about the roast, not the alcohol content. Dark doesn't mean strong, it means toasted. When you were a kid, someone told you that with a ladybug, you count the black dots and that tells you how many years old it is. A sweet lie! The spots have nothing to do with age. The number and shape of the spots tell you what species the ladybug belongs to, not how many birthdays it's celebrated. There are species with 2 spots, others with 7, others with more than 20, and each pattern identifies a different type of insect, like an ID card. On top of that, these insects only live for about a year. They don't get anywhere near enough springs to count on their back. The spots are already there from the moment the insect becomes an adult, and they don't increase over time. It's not a clock. It's a last name. You count spots, and you learn the species, not the age. A ladybug doesn't count years. It shows off its family. You think paper was invented by the Egyptians with their papyrus from the pyramids. Almost false. And there's a catch. Egyptian papyrus isn't actually real paper, it's something else entirely. The Egyptians would cut strips from the stem of a plant, press them together, and weave them into each other, more like a pressed mat than an actual sheet. Real paper. The kind made from broken down fibers that are soaked and dried. The kind you use today was invented in China. The recipe is credited to an official named Kai Lun. Around the year 105 of our era, he improved the process using bark, rags, and even old fishing nets. All turned into pulp. That technique took centuries to reach Europe. The sheet you write on doesn't come from the Nile. It comes from China, and papyrus is an imposter with great PR. You've got it stuck in your head that crabs walk sideways, period. All of them the same. Dancing sideways, incomplete. It's true that a lot of crabs walk sideways because their legs are jointed in a way that makes it easier and faster for them to move that direction, and moving sideways lets them dodge predators at full speed. But it's not a universal law. There are crabs that walk forward and backward just fine, like some hermit crabs and certain long-legged species. The coconut crab, for example, that huge one that climbs trees, doesn't spend all its time doing the sideways shuffle. How a species walks depends on how its joints are built, so walking sideways is the majority, but not an ironclad rule. Some crabs go straight ahead. They break the mold and walk face forward. You go to the supermarket and choose between white rice and brown rice, thinking they're two types of rice, two plants, two different seeds. The opposite is true. It's the exact same grain, the same plant, the only difference is how much it's been polished. A freshly harvested rice grain comes with a brown layer on the outside, the bran, and a tiny germ inside. If you leave it as is, that's brown rice with all its fiber, vitamins, and healthy fats. If you run it through a machine and strip off that brown layer until it's white and shiny, that's white rice. Softer, but with fewer nutrients and a longer shelf life. They're not cousins, they're the same person. One wearing a coat and the other in a t-shirt. White rice is just brown rice with its jacket taken off. You hear a bagpipe and picture a Scotsman in a kilt on a foggy hillside. Almost false. The bagpipe is way older and way more well-traveled than Scotland. Instruments with an airbag and sounding pipes have existed since ancient times and popped up in all kinds of places. In the Middle East, in North Africa, in Rome. All across Europe, there are Galician bagpipes, Irish bagpipes, Balkan bagpipes, bagpipes from northern Spain. Each region with its own version. The Scots made it wildly famous and turned it into a national symbol. So much so that today people hear it and think only of them, but they didn't invent it. The instrument spread across half the world before the Scotland you picture even existed. The bagpipe isn't Scottish by birth. It's an old traveler that found a home in the hills. You watch a butterfly land on a flower and figure it tastes the nectar with its mouth. The way you taste food. The opposite is true. A butterfly tastes with its feet. On its little legs, it has chemical sensors, taste receptors, that let it recognize whether whatever it's standing on is sweet, whether it's good to eat, or whether it's a good plant to lay its eggs on. The moment it lands, just by planting its feet, it already knows what's underneath. Without even unrolling the little tube it uses to sip nectar afterward, it's as if you had a tongue on the soles of your feet and tasted your food just by stepping on it. For a female butterfly, this is crucial. She walks across leaves, tasting with her feet to choose exactly the right plant to leave her eggs on. A butterfly doesn't taste with its mouth. It tastes by walking. You trim your fingernails all the time and almost never touch your toenails. And you figure it's just because you're too lazy to bend down. There's more to it. It's biology. Fingernails grow quite a bit faster than toenails, somewhere between 2 and 3 times faster depending on the person. Fingernails grow about 1/8 of an inch per month. Toenails grow barely half that. It's believed circulation plays a role. Hands are more active and better supplied with the blood, and that constant use and small bumps stimulate growth. That's why the finger you use the most usually has the fastest growing nail. It's not that you're lazy about your feet. It's that down there the factory runs in slow motion. Up top, nails sprint. Down below, they stroll. You are told that ancient Athens invented democracy and that everyone voted happily. The whole population deciding together. Not quite right. Athenian democracy was only for a minority. Only free adult men who were born in the city got to vote. Every single woman was excluded. Foreigners were excluded, even if they had lived there their whole lives. And a massive portion of the population that wasn't free was excluded too. By most estimates, the people who could actually participate were only somewhere between 10 and 20% of Athens' population. So the birthplace of democracy was actually quite exclusive. A select club deciding on behalf of everyone else. It was still a huge step forward for its time, nobody's arguing that. But the picture of the whole population voting together is pure fiction. Democracy, sure, but only for a few. At the produce stand, you see broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, and kale as 4 completely different plants from 4 different families. False. All 4 and several others are exactly the same species, Brassica oleracea. The only thing that changes is which part of the plant people chose to select and exaggerate over thousands of years of cultivation. With cabbage, they selected for tightly packed leaves. With broccoli and cauliflower, they selected for unopened flower buds. With kale, loose leaves. Even kohlrabi and Brussels sprouts come from that same mother plant. It's like dogs, a Chihuahua, and a Great Dane are the same species after centuries of selective breeding. Half your vegetable tray, which you swore were totally different things, are actually twin sisters. The same plant, styled 5 different ways by human hands. You hear a ukulele and picture a Hawaiian beach, palm trees, flower leis. Almost false. The ukulele sounds Hawaiian, but that's not where it was born. It was brought over by Portuguese immigrants, specifically from the island of Madeira, who arrived in Hawaii in the late 19th century, around 1879, carrying small, similar stringed instruments called the cavaquinho and the machete. Hawaiians fell in love with the little instrument, adopted it, made it their own, and gave it its name. Ukulele, which some say means jumping flea, describing how the fingers move. They embraced it so completely that today it's a total symbol of the islands. But the instrument's DNA crossed the ocean from Portugal. The most Hawaiian sound in the world carries a Portuguese passport. Hawaii didn't invent it. It adopted it and raised it as its own. You grab the first thing you see on the shelf, thinking deodorant and antiperspirant are the same product with a different name. False, they do different jobs. Deodorant targets odor. It doesn't stop you from sweating. You'll sweat just the same, but it contains ingredients that fight the bacteria on your skin, which are the ones that, by feeding on your sweat, produce that bad smell. In other words, it lets you sweat, but keeps it from smelling. Antiperspirant, on the other hand, stops the sweat itself. It uses aluminum compounds that temporarily plug the pores of your sweat glands and reduce how much perspiration comes out. One covers up the smell, the other shuts off at the tap. That's why a lot of products combine both functions. If you sweat a ton, look for an antiperspirant. If the smell is your only issue, deodorant will do. They're not synonyms. One perfumes the battle, the other cuts off the supply. You buy the pricier sea salt thinking it's healthier because it has less sodium than regular table salt. False. All salt, sea salt, pink Himalayan salt, and plain old table salt is basically the same thing, sodium chloride. And it has practically the same amount of sodium per gram. If you overdo it with sea salt, you overdo it on sodium. Just the same as with regular salt. The only real difference is a tiny amount of trace minerals that give it a slightly different color or flavor, but nutritionally, it doesn't move the needle. Sometimes coarse sea salt flakes seem like they season less, but that's because they take up more space per spoonful, not because they have less sodium. You're paying more for the same thing with better marketing. Salt is salt. Your blood pressure can't tell the difference between the oceans and the Shakers. You've heard it 1,000 times that a lot of stuff in your house was invented by NASA for astronauts, and that the non-stick coating on your pan and the Velcro on your sneakers came out of the space program. False. Teflon, that non-stick coating where not even an egg sticks to the pan, was discovered by accident by a chemist named Roy Plunkett in 1938, long before the space race even existed. And Velcro was invented by a Swiss engineer named Georges de Mestral in the 1940s and 50s, inspired by spiky burrs that kept sticking to his clothes and his dog's fur after walks through the countryside. NASA did use them, sure, the same way you use a screwdriver, but they didn't invent them. The credit belongs to a lab accident and a dog covered in burrs. You drop an egg in a glass of water, it floats, and you toss it straight in the trash, convinced it's gone bad. Half true, not always. The floating trick tells you how old an egg is, not whether it's spoiled. An egg has an air pocket inside, a tiny bubble that grows bigger over time because the shell is porous and lets in a little air day by day. A really fresh egg has a small air pocket and sinks to the bottom lying flat. An older one has a bigger air pocket and floats. Floating means it's had some time on it, and you should cook it well or use it soon, but it doesn't automatically mean it's rotten and dangerous. An egg that's a couple weeks old might float a little and still be perfectly fine. Floating tells you its age, not that it's spoiled. You bite into a nectarine, that smooth fruit that looks like a peach without the fuzz, and you swear it's some weird cross, half peach, half plum, cooked up in a lab. False. A nectarine is a peach. The exact same thing, the exact same species, Prunus persica, with no plum involved at all. The only difference comes down to one tiny detail in a single gene, the one that decides whether the skin has fuzz or not. A peach has fuzz, a nectarine doesn't, and that's it. Everything else is the same. It's so close that a peach tree, through a spontaneous mutation, can suddenly start producing nectarines out of nowhere. And it can happen the other way around too. There was no crossbreeding, just one less hair. The most designer-looking fruit at the produce stand is really just a freshly shaved peach. Same fruit, different face. And we've reached the end of this full hour of lies. Leave a like if I blew up at least one thing you were sure was true, subscribe so you don't miss the next batch, and tell me in the comments which myth was hardest for you to let go of. The one where you said, no way, that can't be true. I believed that my whole life. I read every single one. See you in the next hour of lies. Bye.